Pull it down here. Pour it to the cloud. And here we go. Everybody's live everywhere. We should have got our auger thing, and we did. There's auger. Okay, there's my approval. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to continue our study with paper 128. And tonight we're on page 1411 in the original book, or paper 128, section 3, paragraph 1, the 23rd year, AD 17. And the 23rd year means that Jesus was in his 23rd year on this paper. So let's get started here. I'm going to let my wife start out, and we'll go from there.
3, the 23rd year, AD 17. This year, the financial pressure was slightly relaxed as 4 were at work. Miriam earned considerable by the sale of milk and butter. Martha had become an expert weaver. The purchase price of the repair shop was over 1/3 paid. The situation was such that Jesus stopped work for 3 weeks to take Simon to Jerusalem for the Passover. And this was the longest period away from daily toil he had enjoyed since the death of his father.
Okay, so Jesus decided to take 3 weeks to take Simon to Jerusalem. That's what this map was at the beginning of this tonight. And we're going to see it as soon as I change this next slide. But it shows the pathway that they went going to and from Jerusalem to take Simon to the Passover. You know, he's trying to take each one of the boys at least once to the Passover. And there's the map of them going to the Passover and back. All right. They journeyed to Jerusalem by the way of the Decapolis and through Pella, Gerasa, Philadelphia, Heshbon, and Jericho. They returned to Nazareth by the coast route, touching Lydda, Joppa, Caesarea, thence around Mount Carmel to Ptolemais and Nazareth. This trip fairly well acquainted Jesus with the whole of Palestine north of the Jerusalem district. This prepared him for when he got ready to do his mission. Right? There's another picture of that. All right. Letch, would you take the next one for us, please?
Yeah. At Philadelphia, Jesus and Simon became acquainted with a merchant from Damascus who developed such a great liking for the Nazareth couple that he insisted they stop with him at Jerusalem headquarters. While Simon gave attendance at the temple, Jesus spent much of his time talking with this well-educated and much-traveled man of world affairs. This merchant owned over 4,000 caravan camels. He had interests all over the Roman world and was now on his way to Rome. He proposed that Jesus come to Damascus to enter his Oriental import business. But Jesus explained that he did not feel justified in going so far away from his family just then. But on the way back home, he thought much about these distant cities and the even more remote countries of the far west and the far east countries he had so frequently heard spoken of by the caravan passengers and conductors.
Okay, so we can see that other people were interested in Jesus coming to work for them too, right? Interpreter and that sort of thing, and just working people's businesses, which is pretty impressive for a man of just 23 at that time. And this kind of gave him an interest to go to Rome pretty shortly after this, right? So this is where it all started. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Simon greatly enjoyed his visit to Jerusalem. He was duly received into the commonwealth of Israel at the Passover consecration of the new sons of the commandment. While Simon attended the Passover ceremonies, Jesus mingled with the throngs of visitors and engaged in many interesting personal conferences with numerous Gentile proselytes.
Notice that Jesus mixed with the Gentiles quite a bit so that he could get to know them, because he grew up with Jews. He knew about the Jewish traditions, but he didn't know that much about the Gentiles. So every opportunity he had, he mingled with the Gentiles and tried to understand them as a people also.
Roger?
Yeah.
So, what is a proselyte?
Somebody that's been converted to Judaism. In this case, a proselyte is anybody that gets converted to a different religion or sect, whatever you'd say. But in this case, they're talking about proselytes of the Jewish faith. So these individuals started out as Gentiles, and they were converted to Jews. But even though they were converted to Jews, the Jews considered them second-class citizens, right?
So I know Jews didn't submit to baptism, but didn't the Gentiles have to
Yes.
be baptized
Yes.
in order to be a proselyte?
Yeah, that's what the pool of shalom there was for, right?
Okay.
All right. So, and it's interesting though, but when John the Baptist comes along, even the Jews started to be baptized. Remember?
Yeah.
You know, when John came along, he baptized everyone, both Jews and Gentiles. All right.
Perhaps the most notable of all of these contacts was the one with a young Hellenist named Stephen. This young man was on his first visit to Jerusalem and chanced to meet Jesus on Thursday afternoon of Passover week. While they both strolled about viewing the Osmanian palace, Jesus began the casual conversation that resulted in their becoming interested in each other, and which led to a 4-hour discussion of the way of life and the true God and his worship. Stephen was tremendously impressed with what Jesus said. He never forgot his words.
You're muted, Roger.
And this is interesting because we're going to find out in the next paragraph or so that Stephen was the first person to be killed for his faith in Jesus.
The first martyr.
Yeah, the very first one. Okay, and there's a picture of it right there. He got stoned to death. This is what happened. And this same Stephen, who subsequently became a believer in the teachings of Jesus and whose boldness in preaching this early gospel resulted in him being stoned to death by the irate Jews. Some of Stephen's extraordinary boldness in proclaiming his view to the new gospel was the direct result of this earlier interview with Jesus. But Stephen never even faintly surmised that the Galilean he had talked with some 15 years previously was the very same person whom he later proclaimed the world's Savior, and for whom he was to soon die, thus becoming the first martyr of the early evolving Christian church faith, the very first martyr. When Stephen yielded up his life as the price of his attack upon the Jewish temple and its traditional practices, there stood by one named Saul, a citizen of Tarsus. And when Saul saw how this Greek could die for his faith, they were aroused in his heart those emotions which eventually led him to espouse the cause for which Stephen died, later on becoming the aggressive and indomitable Paul, the philosopher, if not the sole founder of the Christian religion. You notice they give him the credit for founding the Christian religion, because it was Paul's ideas, and the philosophy in the Christian religion came directly from Paul, not Jesus. All right.
So Stephen died in AD 32.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 15 years after this meeting in Jesus. And he didn't even know it was the same Jesus that he talked to. Isn't that strange? That is strange. Right? You never know in life who's going to impress you, right? Letch, would you take the next?
Yeah. On the Sunday after Passover week, Simon and Jesus started on their way back to Nazareth. Simon never forgot what Jesus taught him on this trip. He had always loved Jesus, but now he felt that he had begun to know his father-brother. They had many heart-to-heart talks as they journeyed through the country and prepared their meals by the wayside. They arrived home Thursday noon, and Simon kept the family up late that night, relating his experiences.
So this was an experience. This was an exciting thing to the Jews of that time. Going to Jerusalem, that was the most important thing they did, right? So he had to tell everybody about it. Rodney, take the next one.
Mary was much upset by Simon's report that Jesus spent most of the time when in Jerusalem visiting with strangers, especially those from the foreign countries. Jesus' family never could comprehend his great interest in people, his urge to visit with them, to learn about their way of living, and to find out what they were thinking about.
Okay. So Mary wanted to see Jesus do what?
Be a Jew.
Be a Jew. He wanted her to be the Messiah, right? And she was hoping every time he went that he'd come back and tell her, well, I did it. I told everybody who I was, right? All right. Diana.
More and more, the Nazareth family became engrossed with their immediate and human problems. Not often was mention made of the future mission of Jesus, and very seldom did he himself speak of his future career. His mother rarely thought about his being a child of promise. She was slowly giving up the idea that Jesus was to fulfill any divine mission on earth. Yet at times her faith was revived when she paused to recall the Gabriel visitation before the child was born.
You're muted.
Oh, she held on to that view. I can't remember that. Unmute myself. Yeah, I unmuted myself. All right, so she was slowly giving up the idea that Jesus was going to be the Messiah, but deep down inside, she really wanted that to happen, right? All right. For the Damascus episode. The last 4 months of this year, Jesus spent at Damascus as the guest of a merchant whom he met at Philadelphia when he was on his way to Jerusalem. As a representative of this merchant had sought out Jesus when passing through Nazareth and escorted him to Damascus. This part Jewish merchant proposed to devote an extraordinary sum of money to the establishment of a school of religious philosophy at Damascus. Guess who else came from Damascus? Saul, who became Paul, right?
Mhm.
Really?
He was known as Saul of Damascus before he became Paul the Apostle. He planned to create a center of learning which would outrival Alexandria, and he proposed that Jesus should immediately begin a long tour of the world's educational centers preparatory to becoming the head of this new project. This is one of the greatest temptations that Jesus ever faced in the course of his purely human career. Why would this be a temptation, y'all? Anybody got an idea?
Well, because it's a religious school, and he really thought about that.
Yeah, it'd make him famous, wouldn't it? It'd make him a famous teacher, right? So yeah, it would be tempting to him for sure.
Well, didn't he also not want to be remembered from his writings?
That's right. He didn't. He didn't want any one episode in his life to be more important than any other. and that way he wouldn't become over popular, and then he wouldn't run into what he did later on in his preaching career, people trying to make him a king, right? So that's a big thing. Would you take the next one, Letch? Appreciate it.
Yeah. Presently, this merchant brought before Jesus a group of 12 merchants and bankers who agreed to support this newly projected school. Jesus manifested deep interest in the proposed school, helped them plan for its organization, but always expressed the fear that his other and unstated but prior obligations would prevent his accepting the direction of such a pretentious enterprise. His would-be benefactor was persistent, and he profitably employed Jesus at his home doing some translating while he, his wife, and their sons and daughters sought to prevail upon Jesus to accept the preferred honor. But he would not consent. He well knew that his mission on earth was not to be supported by institutions of learning. He knew that he must not obligate himself in the least to be directed by the counsels of men, no matter how well-intentioned.
Why do you think that he felt that way about things? You think it was because he did not want anyone to allow to influence him in one way or another, right? And that's why it's going to tell us in a little bit later in this chapter that he wouldn't even take money when the people from Alexandria asked him to come down there and talk to him, and he wouldn't even take the expense money it took him to get down there. His remark that his long as he had two strong arms, his family would not accept alms. Okay.
Well, isn't it true too that in establishing a philosophic sort of bureaucracy that in effect a religion which would be created, which he really didn't want either.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. All right. All right. Rodney, would you take the next one?
Yes. He who was rejected by the Jerusalem religious leaders, even after he had demonstrated his leadership, was recognized and hailed as a master teacher by the businessmen and bankers of Damascus. And all this when he was an obscure and unknown carpenter of Nazareth.
So people recognize his talent right off, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
He never spoke about this offer to his family, and the end of this year found him back in Nazareth, going about his daily duties just as if he had never been tempted by the flattering propositions of the Damascus friends. Neither did these men of Damascus ever associate the latter citizen of Capernaum, who turned all Jewry upside down, with the former carpenter of Nazareth, who had dared to refuse the honor which their combined wealth might have procured.
So even though they gave him this honor, he would not take it. And then later on, they didn't even know it was the same Jesus that was going around teaching, right? Jesus most cleverly and intentionally contrived to detach various episodes of his life so that they never became, in the eyes of the world, associated together as the doings of a single individual. Many times in subsequent years, he listened to the recital of this very story of this strange Galilean who declined the opportunity of founding a school in Damascus to compete with Alexandria. So he even heard the stories of himself back to himself, didn't he?
Hmm.
All right. Letch, would you take the next one?
One purpose which Jesus had in mind when he sought to segregate certain features of his earthly experience was to prevent the building up of such a versatile and spectacular career as would cause subsequent generations to venerate the teacher in place of obeying the truth which he had lived and taught. Jesus did not want to build up such a human record of achievement as would attract attention from his teaching. Very early, he recognized that his followers would be tempted to formulate a religion about him which might become a competitor of the gospel of the kingdom that he intended to proclaim to the world. Accordingly, he consistently sought to suppress everything during his eventual career, which he thought might be made to serve this natural human tendency to exalt a teacher in place of proclaiming his teachings.
And that's exactly what happened with Paul, wasn't it? They
Yeah.
exalted Jesus, the teacher, instead of continuing on with his teachings of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, right?
Right.
So it happened just exactly the way he was afraid it would, annoying people. Rodney, would you take the next one?
Humans are predictable and we're superstitious. This same motive also explains why he permitted himself to be known by different titles during various epochs of his diversified life on earth. Again, he did not want to bring any undue influence to bear upon his family or others, which would lead them to believe in him against their honest convictions. He always refused to take undue or unfair advantage of the human mind. He did not want men to believe in him unless their hearts were responsive to the spiritual realities revealed in his teachings.
Okay, so even though Jesus was so intelligent and all that, he still didn't want to take advantage of people that were ignorant, did he? So he tried to teach in such a way that even those less fortunate people that weren't real smart would believe at the level they were in. Gary, Mr. Gary, how you doing tonight? Would you like to take the next one? You're muted, Gary.
I said, I'm sorry, I was late. I was changing a diaper, and if you don't believe me, you can smell my fingers.
No, thank you. We'll pass on that.
We don't have smell-o-vision yet.
That's right.
Oh,
We don't
I
have.
knew I was safe.
We don't have that scratch and smell feature yet in the TVs.
Give you time with AI.
Yeah. All right. You want to take the next one for us?
Yeah. By the end of this year, the Nazareth home was running fairly smoothly. The children were growing up, and Mary was becoming accustomed to Jesus's being away from home. He continued to turn over his earnings to James for the support of the family, retaining only a small portion for his immediate personal expenses.
Okay, so he was a faithful brother-father, wasn't he? You know, giving his money over to the family. All right, Diane.
As the years passed, it became more difficult to realize that this man was the Son of God on earth. He seemed to become quite like an individual of the realm, just another man among men. And it was ordained by the Father in heaven that the bestowal should unfold in this very way.
So he was supposed to gain experience as a regular man, and that's exactly what he did, didn't he? Right?
Mm-hmm.
24th year, AD 18. Now, for y'all at home that's listening to this, might not realize none of these things in this paper is in the Bible. And if you go out looking for it, you're not going to find it. So just wanted to remind you of that. These are all things directly from the Urantia book that was recorded by the Midwayers and the guardian angel of Apostle Andrew. So these are not related in the New Testament whatsoever. All right. 24th year AD 18. This was Jesus' first year of comparatively freedom from family responsibility. James was very successful in managing the home with Jesus' help in counsel and finances. So James took up the responsibility and did exactly what he was supposed to do. Letch, would you take the next one?
Yeah. The week following the Passover of this year, a young man from Alexandria came down to Nazareth to arrange for a meeting. Later in the year, between Jesus and a group of Alexandrian Jews at some point on the Palestinian coast. This conference was set for the middle of June, and Jesus went over to Caesarea to meet with 5 prominent Jews of Alexandria who besought him to establish himself in their city as a religious teacher, offering as an inducement to begin with the position of assistant to the Shazan in their chief synagogue.
Okay, so y'all need to realize this is a great honor they're offering him to be the assistant of the Shazan. Okay, so he had an appointment to go meet with these people. This is what happens. All right, Rodney, would you take the next one?
The spokesman for this committee explained to Jesus that Alexandria was destined to become the headquarters of Jewish culture for the entire world, that the Hellenistic trend of Jewish affairs had virtually outdistanced the Babylonian school of thought. They reminded Jesus of the ominous rumblings of rebellion in Jerusalem and throughout Palestine, and assured him that any uprising of the Palestinian Jews would be equivalent to national suicide, that the iron hand of Rome would crush the rebellion in 3 months, and that Jerusalem would be destroyed and the temple demolished, that no one stone would be left upon another.
And that's exactly what Jesus reminded them of, didn't he? And that's
So
exactly what happened.
he
Right?
kept this
Yeah.
in mind even
Yeah,
later when he explained it to the
Yeah.
apostles.
that's right. And that's exactly what happened. What happened? Rome came here in and wiped out all the Jews, right?
Sure.
70 AD.
70 AD. That's what happened. And not one stone was left on another of the temple. Now, that didn't include the temple wall and all the surrounding buildings. He's talking about the temple itself. So they destroyed it. So where the temple was, they believe, was the rock where now there's a Muslim temple on it that was built later.
Isn't that was the first Holocaust then?
Yeah, you could say that.
Probably.
Yeah.
It literally wiped out the Jewish population in Jerusalem that didn't
Well-
flee, right?
And then actually thousands were crucified.
That's right. Right.
I mean, many thousands.
Yeah, I forget which emperor it was, but he lined the road into Rome with crucifixions of Jewish citizens. And I think there was over 500 at one point being crucified at the same time on the road into Rome. So it's a lot of
The other thing is the enslaved Jews were used to build the Colosseum.
yeah, that's true too.
Hmm.
And don't forget the uprising of the what was it? The guys that fought. My brain went to
The
on
Spartacus?
Spartacus, and
Mhm.
yeah, the gladiators. I couldn't think of the name of them. The gladiators and the slaves were all crucified. They crucified 500 of those on one of the roads to Rome too.
Hmm.
So
You've
lot.
heard the story about the one that was crucified that was on the cross singing?
They what?
You heard the story about the guy that was on the cross when they put all the people on the cross and the legions was marching into Rome, with the victory. And these people were all crucified on the road to Rome. And the guy was on the cross singing, and he couldn't understand why would this guy sing when he's suffering. So And so the head of the legion set a soldier up, and the guy was pretty weak, but they could still say he's singing. And so he leaned in to listen to what the guy was singing. And the guy was singing, "I love a parade." I was just thought
Okay.
I'd pass that along.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Mr. Comedian, we'll let you take the next paragraph here.
Yeah, that's what I get for being a smart son of a gun.
That's right.
Okay. Who's up, Les or me?
I think you are.
Okay. Jesus listened to all they had to say, thanked them for their confidence, and in declining to go to Alexandria, in substance said, "My hour has not yet come." They were non-paused by the apparent indifference to the honor they had sought to confer upon him. Before taking leave of Jesus, they presented him with a purse in token of the esteem of his Alexandrian friends, and in compensation for the time and expense of coming over to Caesarea
Mhm.
to confer with them. But he likewise refused the money, saying, "The house of Joseph has been received alms, and he cannot eat another bread as long as I am strong armed and my brothers can labor."
Okay, so the house of Joseph has never received alms, and he wouldn't take it, right? Rodney,
wonder why he looked at it as alms.
I don't know because he had expenses getting there, so I'm not sure. Did I just skip over you?
Who?
You reading?
I don't know. I thought Gary was being punished.
In that case, won't you take the next one?
I'm glad you got my my
That's right.
back, Rodney.
That's right.
Okay, his friends from Egypt set sail for home, and in subsequent years, when they heard rumors of the Capernaum boat builder who was creating such a commotion in Palestine, few of them surmised that he was the babe of Bethlehem, grown up in the same strange acting Galilean who had so unceremoniously declined the invitation to become a great teacher in Alexandria.
Okay, now let me catch y'all up on something. When Joseph and Mary fled into Alexandria, for 4 months at least, remember they gave Jesus a copy of the Torah, right?
In Greek.
In Greek. And that's what they were talking about just a minute ago, how the Hellenistic influence has overrun the Babylonian influence. Now, the influence in Jerusalem, the Jews in Jerusalem, was a direct descendant of the Babylonian influence. Actually, the Torah was written during the time they were captured as Babylonian slaves. Okay, so that's why the Babylonian influence was in the Jews in Jerusalem. While the other Jews that broke off and went to Alexandria were more influenced by the Greek philosophers. And that's what they're talking about. So the scriptures that they gave Jesus was in what? Greek. And so when he grew up, when they asked him to come back and teach, they didn't know it was the same babe or Jesus, the child that they had given the Greek scriptures to. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that's where this all comes back together. So when they invited him as a great teacher, they did not realize it was the same baby that they had given the scriptures to.
Oh, you think it was the same group?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. So
May I clarify or try to?
Yeah, go ahead.
What you're saying is Babylon was a powerhouse, and the Jews were involved in them.
Yeah, they became
The Romans
slaves.
came
Yeah,
around.
they were conquered by the Babylonians,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
and
enslaved.
some of the Jews ran away to Alexandria,
Right.
and they prospered on their own, but Rome was the dominant power.
Right.
And so they spread the Greek language, although I thought it was Latin in Rome.
Well, no, Latin in Rome, the church, but the original language was Greek.
For the Greeks, but then
Yeah.
the Romans take the Greeks over.
Yeah, but they adopted their language and their philosophies and stuff like that.
Okay.
No,
That's how Alexandria became Greek/Romanized.
Right. Alexander the Great was really a Hellenized Roman. That's what he was.
Now we're
Okay.
talking Alexandria in Egypt, I think it is.
Yeah, it's in Egypt.
Yeah. And that's the one where they had the fantastic library that got destroyed somehow.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right. Now,
and the lighthouse.
if you watch Ancient Aliens and shows like that, they try to convince you that all society and everything else came from the oh my goodness, I'm brain fart tonight, brain dead. Wasn't from the Babylonians. It was from somebody help me.
I know the
Nebuchadnezzar?
no
No,
the same word that we couldn't figure out before.
yeah,
Nepharescence or
No, they got ancient writing.
yeah, the right,
Nebuchadnezzar.
It's not.
huh?
Nebuchadnezzar.
No, it's the tablets. That's they just figuring out how to interpret.
Sumerian.
Oh, Hammurabi.
Sumerians. That's what I couldn't think of. Sumerians. Yeah, everybody thinks that society and everything started with the Sumerians, but it did not by any shape, form, or fashion. Look at me jumping up and down. The Sumerians did not start everything. The Caligastia 100 started popularization of the Bedouins and create a society back then. And Van and Amidon was the greatest influence between the Caligastia 100 and Adam and Eve. So all these things, they think that the global tepi, never can get that right, is only 10,000 years old, but it's not. It's much, much older. It was back before 40,000 years ago. And it was due to the influence of Van and Abaddon. And the way we know that is look how close a proximity Van, the water, or the lake Van, is to Globo Tepe, right? And he started civilizations, Van started civilizations all the way around Lake Man, okay, between the Caligastia 100 and Adam and Eve. And that was well over 150,000 years he had to do this because he didn't die during that 150,000 years, or neither did Amidon. So you could say that Globiteki, you could consider that much like the Garden of Eden or something similar, that Van and Amidon probably started to civilize the Bedouins in that area. You with me?
Roger,
Yeah.
they have only just scratched the surface. Once, if they ever do excavate down,
Yeah.
it will be discovered that it's ancient.
Very ancient, very over 40,000 years old, right? In that period of time, between 40,000 years ago and 150,000 years ago, or 250,000 years ago, was the period of whom? Van and Amidon. And they did not leave until Adam and Eve came. Remember that? So let's get our history right here. So they were the influences of the Bedouins who end up becoming Babylonians eventually, who were the barbarians that took over those Bedouins during that period of time. Now, the Sumerians came afterwards, not the other way around. The Sumerians came after, and they started with their writing, but there was already a writing that was on the planet that the Caligastia 100 started teaching and Adam and Eve started teaching, because Dan and Amadon had already started teaching the Bedouins how to write. Okay? So all of this came down through Babylonia, down through Samaria, but the Sumerians were not the first ones. That's my point. Okay? And if you watch Ancient Aliens, they think all civilizations started with the Sumerians. Poppycock. That's what I say. Okay? And I know this seems like a moot point, but it's not. Because when you start sticking in things in our history that is not true, then everyone assumes that this is the way things happened, and they did not. They cut out the Caligastia 100, they cut out Vanna Abaddon, they cut out Adam and Eve, they cut out the influence of the Babylonians, they cut out the influence of the Tower of Babel, which was they were trying to build literally a stairway to God, and they couldn't decide on who they were going to worship on the tower. Okay, so when you get the story straight, it makes perfect sense. But then you have people come along and said, well, this Ancient Aliens taught the Sumerians, and this is where we got all of our civilizations. No, they didn't do that. Right. The only ancient aliens that taught our civilization was the Caligastia 100s and the Caligastia 100 and Adam and Eve. If you think about it, they were aliens, right? They were not from this planet, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they weren't. So that makes them aliens. They were the only ancient aliens that taught us anything. Okay, so just trying to get to the story straight here. But the fact is, the Sumerian writings that they have, the AI is figuring out how to decipher it. They may discover all these things from the writings that's out there,
They may discover the history prior to the Sumerians.
Right. That's my whole point.
What you're talking about.
Right. There was a
Sumerian history.
Whole lot of history before the Sumerians, because think of it this way. The Torah and the Old Testament was not written down. It was just stories told generation to generation until the Jews were literally made into slaves by the Babylonians. So while they were Babylonian slaves, that's when the ancient philosophers of the Jewish faith decided maybe we should write this stuff down so future generations can know about it. Okay. Guess where they learned how to write this stuff down? It wasn't from the Sumerians.
The Babylonians?
Bingo.
See?
So Dr. Paul has made his preaching for tonight. Now shut up. But
I think that Ancient Aliens program is baloney. It's not based on any scientific facts or.
Yeah, but it's got some
pure
interesting.
conjecture.
It's
It
got
does have
some
some
really
interesting-
interesting stuff, but it's not based on
Yeah.
fact, and people take it as fact, and it's not true.
Based on conjecture, based on what they're trying
And-
to put together with the sketchy information they have. So,
Well, Gary, they always come back to the ancient alien theory is this, right? The ancient alien theory is poppycock. Okay, so
I got news for you. Theory means in thought only, proof not.
yeah, it's what we don't know, and what we don't know is a lot. Why do you think they brought the Urantia book? When I work on this stuff, on these videos that we put out, and I've been working on this 26 chapter thing, the book I'm working on, and when I look back at this stuff that I've taught before, all this stuff is so important because nobody's teaching it, right? That's the reason I do it, because somebody has to put it out there. I don't want to do this stuff. I'm a tired old man. I'm over 70 years old. I'm too tired to write a book, but somebody has got to put this. I know. Look at Rodney playing a little fiddle.
Can I add something from personal experience, if you don't mind, for a minute or so?
Yeah.
So in 1974, I traveled to Mexico and I went to the Maya ruins in Palenque.
Wow.
And at that time, a book had come out called Chariot of the Gods by
Mhm.
Eric von
Eric
Daniken.
Van Daniken. Yeah, I read it
Right,
in the
he
70s.
proposed a
Yeah.
lot of these things. Anyway, in his book, there's a sculpture in that Temple of Inscriptions, which I went in, and at the bottom is a huge stone carving, which he conjectured is an image of a spaceship taking off.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I went up there with a tour group of archaeologists, and when we got down to the bottom of below the ground of the pyramid, and I asked him about that, and he actually started laughing. I said, "This is complete nonsense," you know.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I remember when that came out in the 70s. I don't remember exactly which year in the 70s, but I read it myself. And back then I was a Baptist, I mean, hard, dyed in the wool Baptist, And when I read this about the chariots of fire, I had no idea of what uh, fusion with a thought adjuster was or any of this stuff, But I read this and I thought something is odd about this. It's not quite right. Can't put my finger on what it is, But now that I'm older, I can point out tons of stuff in it, But when you're young and impressionable, you read stuff and experience stuff, and sometimes it's just not the way they say it is, and it's out there on TV, it's out there on the internet, it's out there on these YouTube things, and there's as much garbage out there on YouTube as there ever was on TV, right? I mean, people that have no idea what they're talking about are putting things out there that are just so ridiculous and non-logical. It's pathetic, but that's what happens over time, So got to give it.
To back up your point, Roger, everybody refers to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And Wikipedia is written by people like you and I could put an article out there, and that doesn't mean I know hoot about what I'm writing.
That's exactly true.
Yeah.
Maybe I ought to put my chapters of my book out there on Wikipedia. You think, Gary?
No, don't do that.
Why not? That's not a bad idea.
I think I'll wait and publish it as a real book.
That could be. Publishing is a hard task, I understand, but it's gotten easier. Give you a forewarning. I know somebody that wrote a book on Urantia. She tried to summarize it. I can't remember the title now, or give it to you. If you're interested, I'll try and find it for you. But
well, there's been several out there, but not to the depth that I've gone into on all these subjects I've been working on. So
anyway, Amazon published it, and they did it on Kindle. And she only gets paid if you buy the written book.
Yeah.
So, but
well, I thought about putting it out there online, either as a freebie or so cheap that people would be able to afford it. Like the whole book for $10 or something.
Well,
so help fray the cost of all the stuff I do.
Well, Amazon puts it out there. You can buy the book for probably $10 with the Kindle, on your Kindle.
Yeah. Okay, let's get going. Back to Jesus' return to Nazareth here. And I don't remember who's up. Did you read Rodney?
Rodney just took my place.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and read this one, Rodney.
Okay. Jesus returned to Nazareth. The remainder of this year was the most uneventful 6 months of his whole career. He enjoyed this temporary respite from the usual program of problems to solve and difficulties to surmount. He communed much with his Father in heaven and made tremendous progress in the mastery of his human mind.
So even Jesus had to master his human mind, didn't he? So all of us have to go through this. You can't explain to young people what the benefits of age are, can you? Some things you have to experience. There's no way around it. Diane.
Yes. The human affairs on the worlds of time and space do not run smoothly for long. In December, James had a private talk with Jesus, explaining that he was much in love with Esther, a young woman of Nazareth, and that they would sometime like to be married if it could be arranged. He called attention to the fact that Joseph would soon be 18 years old, and that it would be a good experience for him to have a chance to serve as the acting head of the family. Jesus gave consent for James's marriage 2 years later, provided he had, during the intervening time, properly trained Joseph to assume direction of the home.
You're muted.
So you see how Jesus actually trained each one of the boys to be the head of a household over a period of time, which was a smart thing to do.
He was a good father.
He was a very good father. And now things began to happen. Marriage was in the air. James' success in gaining Jesus' assent to his marriage emboldened Miriam to approach her brother-father with the plans. Jacob, the younger stonemason, one-time self-appointed champion of Jesus, now business associate of James and Joseph, had long sought to gain Miriam's hand in marriage. After Miriam had laid her plans before Jesus, she directed that Jacob should come to him, making formal requests for her and promise his blessing for the marriage just as soon as she felt that Martha was competent to assume her duties as eldest daughter. So the daughters, he did the exact same thing as he did with the boys, right? Train them to be mothers and fathers. All right, Letch, would you take this last paragraph? And I think this is going to be it for tonight.
When at home, he continued to teach the evening school 3 times a week, read the scriptures often in the synagogue on the Sabbath, visited with his mother, taught the children, and in general conducted himself as a worthy and respected citizen of Nazareth in the commonwealth of Israel.
So he was just like any other person in that town, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, next time we'll take up the 25th year, AD 19. Let's go to our prayer of acceptance here. We'll wrap it up for tonight. Okay.
Want me to read it? Because
yes, go ahead, Gary.
Prayer of acceptance. I believe that Jesus is my paradise Father, and that only by faith am I saved. No sacrifice is necessary. By this same faith, I became a child of God and know that all men and women are my brothers and sisters. I know the Son of God, the sovereign of our universe of Nebadon, as Christ Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. By allowing the will of God to become my will, I will someday stand in the presence of the Paradise Father. In the name of in the name of Christ Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen. And I want to thank everyone that's joining us out there at home from, I guess people are still joining us from Facebook through YouTube and Vimeo. And our podcast is out there on YouTube each Tuesday, Thursday, and now will be Sunday. Everybody remember, if you want to come on Sunday, we'll be having a class about the Mansion Worlds. We're going to continue with the Mansion Worlds on Sunday at 3 o'clock this Sunday. So let everybody know about that. And thank you for joining us. Please come see us again. Let me stop the recording.